Let's talk about how to teach kids how to swallow. This is something that is surprisingly simple, but ever it's definitely a frustration. Definitely a frustration. And I think sometimes we just overthink it a little bit with kids. So I have a pretty foolproof method that I go to whenever I'm working with kids in feeding therapy or just working with a garden variety picky eater that really helps to build their confidence in their ability to taste new food and swallow. And I hope you'll find it helpful. We're going to go through several different steps here, but there are three things we need to be careful of. First of all, we've got to be sure that that child is not at risk for aspiration or doesn't have any physiological or medical reasons that they aren't able to swallow. And if your child's in feeding therapy, then your pediatric feeding therapist is making sure that that's the case. So safety above all else. Other reasons that are based on physiology that a child may have difficulty swallowing might include a tongue tie, even an upper lip tie can impact the ability to propel that food back and swallow it with ease. Structural issues in the mouth, like a submucosal cleft, or something that might be in the throat, like laryngomalacia, or something that's in the gut, like gastroesophageal reflux disease or celiac or any sort of GI discomfort. Nobody wants to swallow if they're uncomfortable or in pain. The other thing we want to be careful of is that there are no motor challenges that are getting in the way of this child being able to swallow with ease. And so the first one that comes to mind for me would be tongue thrust. If your child has a tongue thrust, then they're swallowing by pressing the tip of their tongue forward. Watch my mouth for a second, like this, rather than using the tongue up on the alveolar ridge. That's right here, where you say a D or a T. That's your alveolar ridge. And when your tongue tip rises up to the alveolar ridge, then you swallow like this. Let me show you with a drink of water. Easy, right? But if you swallow by pushing your tongue forward, or even watch, see how it barely sneaks through? You aren't able to propel food backwards with ease. And you tend to stick to really squishy foods like macaroni and cheese, or you know what, even McDonald's chicken nuggets. Those are kind of just pre-chewed chicken, to be honest with you. You don't even need teeth for those. Things like French fries are a really big one for kids who have difficulty propelling food back. Those kids also have a hard time with food spreading in their mouth, and they get a lot of extra food down here in the lateral sulci because they can't gather up the bolus and propel it back because of the way they're swallowing. Well, assuming that the child isn't having any motor challenges like that, or any gross motor challenges, you know, specifically around the trunk area, that might be a child who perhaps isn't walking yet and has some gross motor delays. A lot of parents are surprised to learn that fine motor skills like swallowing are always dependent on gross motor stability. So if your child is having difficulty having a stable trunk and gross motor skills in general, they may be delayed in some of the fine motor skills like swallowing with intention for a new food. So let's assume that we've taken care of all of those, that we don't have any physiological or medical reasons, no sensory reasons, no motor challenges, but really the child just isn't quite sure how to swallow a new food. The most important thing to remember is we don't want to add any pressure to swallow, because I mean, think about it. Have you ever been to the doctor's office and like they're checking your thyroid, or they want to see if you maybe have swollen glands, and they tell you to swallow? It takes a minute. You have to sort of think about it. It takes some concentration. Well, the same thing happens with our kids if we say, okay, swallow. And it's too much pressure for them. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Now, after we consider all of those aspects, then I'm going to walk you through all the steps to teach a child how to swallow a familiar food and then a semi-preferred food. That's right, you're going to start with a familiar food. Whenever we're going to teach a child a new task, we want to start with something super easy. So get a familiar food, let's say it's a Cheerio, that they're able to swallow that pretty well, chew and swallow. Then whatever that food is, you want it to be about the size of a Cheerio or a pea. And if it's something like cheese or, gosh, even a little piece of apple, okay, rather than taking a bite off a big chunk that they normally could chew and swallow, I want you to cut it into a little cube. When we cut a familiar food into a cube, okay, the child can feel the edges of that cube much better in their mouth, and it's a little bit of a different shape than what they're used to, so they're more aware of it, and they're aware of what they're doing with it, with their tongue and where it is in their mouth. Plus, we are going to progress through these steps using little cubes, and I'll go back to this in just a minute to explain why. All right, so you're going to start with a familiar food. If possible, cut it into a pea-sized cube. If it's a Cheerio, you're already there, good enough. And have the child place it on their first molar, what I call their dinosaur teeth. Now, some kids can pop it right in their mouth and lateralize it over, but if you want to have them place it right there, that's fine too. Have them chew just a few times and then immediately reach for a cup of water with a straw. So let's just take a second here to talk about what that cup of water should look like and what the straw should look like. We don't want a straw like this one. Do you see how wide that is? That's kind of your typical Starbucks straw or McDonald's straw, okay? That's too wide. The reason why you don't want that in this situation, it's going to deliver way too much water to their mouth, and that's going to make it harder to propel that little bit of food back. Instead, go with a thinner straw. A coffee stirrer is great if you want to just use a skinny little coffee stirrer to get a tiny little bolus. But some kids need a wider diameter of the straw to wrap their lips around. So in that case, I typically get a silicone straw. This particular one is from Talk Tools, and it's the same one that fits inside the Honey Bear that a lot of therapists use. But it's also the exact same diameter of any silicone straw that is in some of those pop-up thermoses as well. This particular straw, I like it. I don't know how well you can see it. I'm going to try to kind of maybe put it against my purple wall there so you can see it a little bit better. The inside of it, it's rather thick and it's very hard to compress. So when the children wrap their lips around it, they have something firm and solid to get some stability with their lips, but the opening itself is pretty narrow. So when they do go to take a suck, they're just going to get an itty bitty amount on their tongue to help wash this food down. Now, I was going to bring just your standard take and toss cup to demonstrate this for you, but I realized that that's probably a little bit hard to see on this video. So I just grabbed a standard, once again, Starbucks cup. And I wanted to show you that, here, I'm just going to adjust my notes for 1 second. Thank you. I wanted to show you that when you fill up the child's cup, and you're going to use water, remember, but for the sake of this video, I added just a splash of orange juice just to color the water so that everybody watching can see it better. So there's my cup, right? When you fill up the child's cup, I want you to fill up that cup all the way to the very top. Then when you put the lid on and you put a skinny straw in, I'm going to use this one just for demonstration. Now when that child goes to take a drink, they only have about an inch to prime it. As a matter of fact, I would probably, you've heard me say this in other videos, I'd probably cut it down even a little bit more. Because if you don't fill it up all the way to the top and you give them just a little bit, you've got a good 6 inches there where they've got to suck up air before they get any relief to propel the food backwards. You want that liquid to hit their tongue immediately. So be sure you fill it all the way up with water, have a pretty short straw so that they simply have an inch to immediately take a sip. I mean, it hit my tongue right away. Okay. So now you have a child who puts a familiar food in their mouth on their molar, have them chew a couple times, and immediately, that's the key, immediately reach for a drink and wash that little Cheerio down. They already love the food, they're just learning the process. Once they have that down, now you're going to go to what we call a semi-preferred food, which is a food that the child will put in their mouth, they'll chew, but they don't necessarily know how to swallow it, or only on occasion they'll swallow it. Usually when they're not thinking about it, they accidentally swallow. Same thing, pea-sized, cut into a cube on the dinosaur teeth. Immediately grab your water while you're chewing, and then take a sip. So once they've learned the method with the familiar food, then you go to the semi-preferred food. Meanwhile, your feeding therapist or parents who are just working with sort of our garden variety picky eaters, you're still working on learning to taste other foods. But once they get the concept and the skill of swallowing and propelling tiny bits of food back, you can gradually start to increase that pea-sized bite into more like what I call a dime-sized, or maybe even a nickel-sized bite. But any bigger bite than that, that kind of just comes on its own. Once a kid can chew dime-sized bites with me in feeding therapy, it just kind of snowballs and they get it from there. If they don't, there's probably a motor issue going on there.